I'm Aida Rigodaro, and today we're welcoming art gallery expert Nadia Akpinar onto the channel. I can't wait to get stuck in. And by the way, if you enjoy this content, I'd love it if you could hit those like and subscribe buttons. Thanks for watching. Nadia, thank you so much for being here. And apart from being a wonderful friend, you are also incredibly knowledgeable about art and the art world. You've held a number of really interesting roles, so I think you're perfectly placed to be able to tell us a little bit more about the practical functioning of galleries within the art world ecosystem. But first of all, why don't you tell us a little bit more about the roles that you've had in the art world?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here with you. I decided when I was sort of planning my answers to try and focus a little bit on, I think, two of the roles that I had, which I felt were the most pivotal in terms of teaching me everything I've really learned up until this point. So my first role was assistant manager at Vigo Gallery. They're a London-based gallery. They deal mainly in primary market, but also a bit of secondary market. And in that role, because we were such a lean team, I really was able to understand the function of a gallery and all of the different departments that make up the overall business, and to understand how those things connect, and understand also the exhibition cycle, all the prep work that needs to go into putting together a program from start till finish, from the beginning of the year till the end of the year, and also all the different art fairs. So understanding, the entire art fair application process, from the initial application to hopefully getting in, and then the participation, all of the paperwork and all of the organisation that kind of goes behind the scenes in order to make that final booth come together. So I feel really grateful for that first role, because we were, running about 10 exhibitions a year, maybe 4 to 5 art fairs, every single aspect of the business, whether it was marketing, sales, logistics, artist liaison, and dealing with the studios and dealing with the artists in a face-to-face environment, client interfacing. And even just some of the smaller things, like getting the show hung in the gallery space, getting it photographed, making sure that everything was open for all the different opening receptions that were the kind of launch event for every new exhibition. So that was such a crucial part of my formation, and I feel like I learned so much in that role. And the next role I wanted to sort of touch on was my role as Associate Director of Sales, and that was with Debut Gallery. And they are a sort of mid-tier gallery, originally based in New York, but they had also recently opened a space in Saint-Paul-de-Vence, which is just about 30 minutes outside of Nice. I moved there just for a sort of 3-year period, and I had the pleasure of working for them whilst I was there, which was wonderful. And that was a different role. It sort of started out more in a digital marketing capacity, and it ended up morphing into sales, which is something I had also had some previous experience with. And I ended up, sort of gradually growing into the role of Associate Director of Sales, and that was a wonderful experience. It was challenging in the sense that you really felt the responsibility of being a key revenue generator for the business. So that's something that you can't really escape. It's sort of quite a big responsibility, but at the same time, it really forces you to grow and to rise to the challenge. And it sort of left me in a position where I was able to interface with clients and develop and nurture those relationships, and make sure that they felt that Debut was a safe and a warm place where they could interact and they could learn about new and exciting artists. I had the pleasure of being able to attend different art fairs with the gallery, so Expo Chicago, Untitled Art Miami, and I also had the privilege of being able to travel for different exhibition openings, both in New York and at our location, Saint-Paul-de-Vence, to be there for the opening reception. So it was a really fantastic role, and I'm really grateful for the exposure that it gave me and for the experience as well.
Who were some of perhaps the more well-known artists that you were dealing with within those galleries?
Yeah, so at Vigo Gallery, we had the privilege of being able to work with Ibrahim El-Salahi, who is an incredible artist. He's part of the permanent collection at the Tate Modern, and I do try and make a point to go visit his work. And when I see that work, every time I just get goosebumps, because it's so incredibly beautiful. And he's such a true artist in the way that he makes because he has to make, and because it comes from within. And I think that those kinds of works are the ones that are timeless and that just speak to everyone. So he was an amazing artist that we had the privilege of working with during my time at the gallery. We also were showing the work of Brown Bogart, and I know that the director there, I believe, still most likely works with him, but like Cube have also since picked up on his market, and they've also been organising exhibitions with him, and I think they have now taken over the estate in quite a major way. But he was also a really interesting Belgian artist. We had the privilege of showing at Frieze Masters one year, so that was a really exciting experience. And at Tabak Gallery, there are a few primary market artists who I know had some really interesting markets and were doing some amazing work, like Devonshire Moyana, who was also represented by another sort of really interesting Chicago-based gallery called Kavi Gupta, and he had been commissioned to do work for the Smithsonian Anniversary. He'd also been shown in this very large sculptural piece at Art Basel Miami. He'd been shown at Basel. He had a lot of great exposure and was also getting more and more solo exhibitions both in the US and and across Europe as well. So it was a real privilege to get to either meet those artists or to also learn more about their work and communicate that story with clients.
Zeroing in on the title question, say I'm thinking of setting up a gallery or working for a gallery, what are the main revenue generators for a gallery? So how do art galleries make their money?
So to put it simply, they make their money by selling art.
Mm-hmm.
But to break that down for you, there are different kinds of artistic collaborations that you can have. So I wanted to sort of break it down so that it was a more thorough and in-depth response to your question. So you have represented artists, which are the ones who will make up a gallery roster. Mm-hmm. And a gallery roster can, I've seen gallery rosters that go up to sort of, I'm talking more mid-tier because that's my experience, but it can run up to sort of 18, 20 artists, but it can also be a bit smaller. Maybe 8 to 10, that kind of number as well. But those will be artists who you have a formal contract with. And that contract will outline which kind of geographical territories you can represent them in, any type of exclusivity that you want defined between you. And it might also go as far to outline production and, how many works in a specific period of time that you want committed to you as a gallery. So that makes up your represented artists, and with respect to shows and programming and even art fairs, you can also have more casual collaborations, which will be featured artists. And so featured artists, you will of course have some sort of a legal agreement between you, most often in the form of a consignment agreement. And that will basically define that specific collaboration and any terms and conditions that you want outlined between you.
So you can just do the featured.
You could just do featured, exactly. But galleries, in order to have consistent programming and in order to kind of live out what their mission is, which is to build up a market for their represented artists, their sort of first point of loyalty is really to their roster, and then they also have a vision to expand and to explore and to also see if collaborating with new and upcoming talent might be a worthwhile cause and might be something that they want to then explore further later on down the line, if you see what I mean. So with that being said, you have your featured artist, your represented artists, and then the different sales outlets, if we can define it in that way, would be obviously your bricks and mortar space. So that's sort of the traditional space, which is your gallery, your main foothold, which will obviously have walk-in people. It will have regular clients who are coming in. That's where you're also going to be hosting your exhibition program for the whole year. That's where your opening receptions are going to take place, which is sort of the launch event, let's say, for any new exhibition. On top of that, you're also going to have online, which has become a really, really big thing for most galleries, especially post-COVID and during the pandemic, because obviously physical spaces were forced to be closed. And then all of a sudden, the only sort of visibility that galleries had was through online programming. So you have, typically what you'll have is your sort of physical exhibition, and then you'll have virtual exhibitions that are taking place, whether it's on Artsy, which is a third-party digital platform. That exhibition will also be uploaded onto the gallery's website. Most likely you're getting content that's being fed through social media as well, most likely on Instagram. That's kind of the sort of more common platform for the time being.
Are galleries using Instagram to sell quite a lot nowadays?
They are. I do think it sort of depends on the gallery as well. I know that there are slightly more commercial ones like Unit London or something who have a massive following and they're doing incredibly well. And I think that Instagram is a huge revenue generator for them. I do think that maybe the slightly more traditional ones are still needing that bricks and mortar space. They're still making a lot of their sales at art fairs. And I will say for sure, Artsy and online websites are definitely key generators, because people do inquire. The telephone is also, another one. You do get telephone calls, and I actually find the telephone to be quite a great one, because in a way it's voice to voice, it's person to person, and immediately if you feel that that person is responsive and keen to help and knows a lot about the work, then I think those clients are more likely to sort of have an inquiry, then convert to a sale later on down the line, if you follow up correctly. So I think that's these are sort of the different outlets, sales outlets. Art fairs, we'll touch on that later, I know, but art fairs is another huge one for galleries. And what art fairs enable galleries to do is to sort of set up shop, for lack of a better word, in a different location. And so all of a sudden you're opening yourself up to a completely different demographic. And even if you are seeing regular clients who are from back home, it's also a really new and exciting way to reconnect with them in a completely different context and a completely new turf, which I think can sometimes be invigorating for relationships,
Okay, yeah.
So art fairs are another huge sales outlet for galleries.
Okay, we'll talk a bit more about them later, because I love art fairs.
Yeah.
I travel to a lot of them, and I put it all on this channel. So
I watch. I'm following closely.
Well, we've done a few together, haven't we?
Yes, we have.
Yeah.
Okay, so within that sort of gallery framework, then can we look at the different, because I think one big distinction that is often talked about is the primary market and the secondary market, which can be a bit confusing for some people.
Yes.
So can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, of course. So simply put, a primary market work is a work that is being offered to the market for the first time. So let's say, example, a gallery is consigning works from an artist studio to be put into an exhibition. The work is then placed with a client. That first transaction is a primary market sale. Any then subsequent sale of that work will then be entering the secondary market and is then defined and classed as a secondary market sale. Now, another nuance which I wanted to add, which is not really an official definition, but it's more of a connotation, I suppose, so it's a bit of a more nuanced explanation, is that secondary market works, at least in my experience, are also often sort of referring to sometimes more blue chip names.
Okay.
So when I sometimes think of secondary market galleries, I'm thinking of galleries who are perhaps working with names like Yves Klein, Andy Warhol, Lucio Fontana. So of course, a primary market sort of younger artist work, which is...
And these are all deceased artists as well?
These are all deceased, exactly. And that's going to come into sort of what you want to discuss, which is the pros and cons.
Yeah.
So the initial definition that I gave you still stands with respect to primary and secondary market, but an added nuance of, what the secondary market is and how it's defined would also be at times that it can also be to acknowledge and refer to older artists who have deceased, who have passed away, and who have really become historicized and part of the canon of art history. So I know that you wanted me to touch on the pros and cons. So the pros of the primary market are that it's sort of has a bevy of supply. So if you think about London just as one of the major cities which contributes to the overall art market, you have so many fantastic art schools here: Goldsmiths, Slade, Royal College of Art, just to name a few. And every single year those schools are producing graduates from BA programs and MA programs. And so by definition you have this constant influx of sort of talent and fresh supply that's coming into the market. So with respect to supply, there are no issues. So, if you're a gallery operating in that space and if you're looking for fresh talent, the likelihood is you are going to find some amazing artists if you just, go to these graduate shows and graduate programs and you do your best to look. You will definitely find some amazing talent there. The other pros are that it can be a really dynamic market. You are in the making, you're in the business of market making, I should say. So you're basically taking a sort of almost like a seedling, someone that has all of this potential, and if you give it all the right sort of attention, it can really grow into something spectacular.
Yeah, that must be so satisfying as well.
It's so satisfying, and I have witnessed it in my time at Vigo and even some other galleries where you see this kind of arc of progress, and it's just incredible to see that happen. I know it's so rewarding for the artist first and foremost, but it's also really rewarding as a gallery and as a team, because you do put so much work into making all the different projects come together, and so when you see that they're getting the attention that you so wish for them, it's really incredibly satisfying and rewarding. So that's amazing. Another pro is that you haven't got really issues with authenticity, because the artists are still alive. It means that if you really want to trace something or track a work, you can often just reach out to the studio, reach out to the artist. When it comes to certificates of authenticity, I know galleries mostly issue them on behalf of the artist, but you can always, you know, if you're a collector and you really want that extra sort of reassurance, you can always get things authenticated with the artists as well, which is great. So that's another.
Provenance is so important, isn't it?
So important, definitely, and I think it's something that can be quite tricky, especially when it comes to the secondary market. So the cons are that basically the associated costs of showing the art is always footed by the gallery. So if you think about the shipping, the rent for the space, you know, the art fair booth, you know, the cost of entertainment for clients, or to travel to an art fair, hotels, flights, etc. And even for the artist to attend an opening, that's all footed by the gallery. And the artist commission is typically 50%. So in terms of profitability for the gallery, it can be a bit of a challenge, and oftentimes it can also sometimes even be hard to break even if you're not able to sell the full exhibition. So from a business model perspective, that's one of the kind of major challenges, I would say.
Why will I then choose to sort of focus on secondary then, rather than...
So secondary, I would say one of the pros is that, you know, the financial upside can often be greater. I obviously don't want to say in every case it would be, but I think for them more often than not, the prices are higher, the artists are more established, just like we mentioned slightly earlier. Those artists have been historicised, they're in the art history books, they're in the big museum collections, they're in all the major collectors' collections, and so there's very little doubt as to their value or their significance, if you see what I mean. So as a result of that, if you're able to get good access, you can either buy the work as stock and then pick your sort of timing and, you know, be smart about it, and then resell it at a later date and place it either with a museum or a private collector, and you can make a considerable upside. Otherwise, you could also sort of broker a transaction, so find a seller, find a buyer, and then you could make a commission from that. But given that the prices are higher, your percentage is going to be greater than if you were brokering a smaller transaction. So basically, the financial upside is often greater. The other thing that I thought was worth mentioning is that blue chip artists tend to be more resilient in down markets.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Yeah,
okay.
So at the moment we're going through a little bit of a softening in the market, as I'm sure you've been reading. And so collectors tend to, you know, collectors who are still avid to collect and avid to maintain that sort of you know, that pleasure point and that outlet for themselves, which is to collect art, will feel more comfortable transacting with blue chip artists because they feel like it's more of a certainty in terms of their risk reward, if you see what I mean.
Yes.
So
that's a really good point.
Yeah,
that's really good.
I sort of thought that was worth mentioning. The cons, however, of the secondary market are that authenticity can be a little bit of an issue. Just to mention as a brief example, I know that the Andy Warhol authentication board had to close down because they had so much litigation and so many lawsuits against them that it just basically was a liability for them to stay open. And I think to some of the buyers who had perhaps had their work authenticated by very respected sources prior to the board being opened, and then perhaps tried to resell whilst the board was in existence, and then had their work denied for reasons that, you know, are deemed to be controversial, let's say. And so all of a sudden their work has gone from being worth several $100,000 or even a few $1 million to being worth absolutely nothing. And they actually gave themselves the right to stamp and deface the verso of canvases to say denied, or to simply just not give them back to the owners. So authentication can be a huge issue. There's obviously the problem with counterfeits as well, which I'm sure you know, with the Nodler scandal, Nodler gallery scandal, etc. So that side of the secondary market can be more complicated. Obviously supply, scarcity, that's an issue as well, because most of the artists are deceased. So you don't have fresh work coming to the market, and that means that if you wanted to maybe organise an exhibition by a blue chip artist who had passed away, and you're looking to put together a body of work which is from a specific period, you have to do a lot of investigative digging to sort of find who owns exactly which work. And if you're, dealing with families who have had the work in their collection for generations and generations, they're very unlikely to want to part with it. There are also, works that have ended up in major museum collections. So I think having access to work, scarcity, supply, those are sort of issues. And then obviously authenticity, which is a major one that we touched on as well.
What are the main costs to consider when running a gallery?
So costs have definitely gone up. Just as the kind of cost of living crisis has been an issue for a lot of people, that has also affected galleries, because you have to consider that there's the rent, and a lot of these galleries operating from some of the chicest parts of the cities that they're in. So if you think about Mayfair in London being the major sort of gallery hub, and then for example you have Chelsea in New York, which is another one.
Is a physical space still necessary as a cost?
So I think it is. I don't think that the market has adapted enough to online, and I actually think that post-COVID, even though there was a lot of transacting that was going on during the pandemic, because people all of a sudden had a lot more available budget that they weren't spending on things like entertainment and travel and experiences, they were all of a sudden allocating it to art or luxury goods and sort of shopping, if you see what I mean. So I think that post-pandemic people really miss the in-person aspect, and so I do think that it's still necessary. And ultimately sales do boil down to relationships, and so if you're not able to see your collectors on a regular basis in person, that is going to most likely have an impact on how you're able to transact with them, because I do think face-to-face time is sort of a crucial part of maintaining that relationship.
Okay.
So you have your obvious expenses like your rent, your payroll, your energy, then you also have any associated costs with an exhibition, so you have your storage, your shipping, you also have art handlers and technicians, you also have photography that's required, then you have entertainment costs such as opening receptions, so client dinners. For the opening reception you're going to have sort of maybe canapes and drinks and things like that, and then for art fairs they are incredibly expensive. Booths can run up into depending on the size and depending on which fair, they can, I remember an extra large booth at Untitled Miami was sort of $70,000, and that's just for a week period or a 6-day period.
Just for the booth?
Just for the booth.
And then what about insuring the work?
Yes, exactly. Normally that will fall under your general insurance policy.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's also another expense, so thank you for pointing that out. Insurance as well. Payroll, so there's a lot of expenses that come with it, and then when you think about your artist commission, you are splitting 50%, especially in the primary market. So it's not a straightforward business to necessarily be extremely profitable. I think you have to be really have great relationships with your collectors and be savvy about your programming, and try and find a sort of brand identity and really stick with it and hope that you'll find your right collector base.
I think it is important to talk about those costs as well, because I know I've had a
Definitely.
few discussions with people about the art world that aren't necessarily in the art world,
Right.
and they've often found 50% commissions to be too high to take from the artist.
Yes.
But then when you're actually understanding what it takes to run a gallery,
Absolutely.
it starts to make a bit more sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually quite sad, because at the moment there are a lot of galleries who are closing because of the fact that the rents and all those things have gone up so much, and the shipping, which is a huge thing. It's something that you have to spend money on every single month for various reasons. And post-COVID, I think the supply chain was affected during the pandemic, and those costs have just not come down. So it is really difficult, and I've had similar conversations with people who are outside of the art world, and when you tell them that the gallery commission is 50%, they're outraged and shocked. And but the reality is the gallery is pushing incredibly hard on so many levels to make sure that work is being seen, that it's being correctly marketed. You might also, I forgot to mention, have third-party marketing costs. So if you want to work with a PR agency to get further exposure, there's also, you have to pay a subscription fee to Artsy and your art database, which will house all of your client information, your inventory, etc. So there are
those additional costs to consider. But the gallery does do a lot on behalf of the artists in order to make sure that the work is correctly placed, in order to make sure that the work is exhibited in the right context and as often as possible, and to try and also get institutional recognition in the form of either exhibitions or in the form of acquisitions. So it's a big job, and it takes a lot of focus and dedication, and it takes a lot of sort of time investment as well as financial investment as well.
Sort of last couple of questions. Art fairs. So they're something that I personally love. I love going to art fairs. I find I see some of the most interesting sort of works, and I get to meet a lot of variety of people at art fairs all over the world. But how important is attending art fairs as a facet of running a gallery?
I think art fairs have become increasingly important. You are all of a sudden placed amongst your peers on a sort of temporary stage in the form of the fair, and I think that I remember when I was at Vigo and we got into Frieze Masters and we got into Art Basel Miami. I mean, of course, when the news came in, we were incredibly excited, but all of a sudden it's a way of also for a smaller gallery to up level and to be seen amongst the really big hitters. So you've got David Werner, Gagosian, Pace, like the major,
the mega
galleries, exactly. And so I think it's a way of bolstering a gallery's CV. Don't forget, an artist has a CV, but a gallery also has a CV.
That's true.
And so it's a way of really bolstering the gallery's CV. It's a way to help define their position in the market and amongst their peers. And I think it's also, as we touched on before, a great way to network with new clients, to be able to tap into a new demographic, a new geography.
It's a great place to meet with museum curators as well, because oftentimes they will make the effort to attend the sort of major art fairs. One thing that I also wanted to touch on was that a lot of the, if as a gallery you're unable to enter the likes of Frieze or the Basel art fairs, what will
they're the two sort of top ones.
They're the two sort of creme de la creme, definitely, in terms of the biggest and the best, and attended by all of the major galleries. There's also Maastricht, which started out as more of a sort of antiquities and old masters fair, but that's also now expanding to include contemporary, and also has a New York fair as well now, because they're trying to sort of rebrand and expand their outreach a little bit. So those are sort of the creme de la creme, but I would really say Basel is king, and then sort of Frieze, and then maybe TF Maastricht sort of lumped with Frieze perhaps. But there are other satellite fairs which I wanted to just point out. So obviously during Frieze London, there is also 154 Contemporary African Art Fair, and that is an excellent fair in its own right. And the beauty of the satellite fairs is that they are timed to take place at the same time as the major fairs, which means that you have the benefit, if you are exhibiting there, of sort of capturing that footfall. So oftentimes the major collectors, the major museums and institutions will also attend those fairs, and that means as a gallery you're able to interface and interact with a similar level as at the big fairs. Then there will also be a segment of people who don't attend the smaller fairs, but I would say a good percentage of them will, and that's an amazing opportunity for you to have exposure for you as a gallery and for your artists as well.
Wow, thank you so much. And lastly, final question. In your time working at galleries, have there been any particular moments that have stood out as your best parts or the favourite part of working there?
I mean, I think the thing that I would say was probably the most special was that working in a gallery enabled me to meet artists.
Yes.
And I think, and you know this as well because you've met with so many artists and you have some great relationships with different artists as well. But I do think that artists are very special people. I mean, they're both incredibly bright, but they're also very unique, and I think the way that they see the world is quite special.
Completely agree.
Yeah, and I really do believe that they're sort of geniuses in a way, you know. And so being able to speak with them, being able to have an insight into their inspirations, their thought processes, what it is that inspires them, I just find that to be quite awe-inspiring, to be honest with you. So I do think that that's been some of my most special times, is when I've either been able to do a studio visit, or if I wanted to write a sort of sales email or a press release or something, and I felt like I needed to speak to the artist before so I could really absorb myself into that new body of work that they just made, or you know what their inspirations were behind the work, then those few moments and minutes that I'd spend with them really always left a very strong impact on me. And I'd say the other sort of perk slash benefit, I mean, always involved a lot of hard work, but was just getting to travel as well for work. So getting to do art fairs in sort of Brussels, Chicago, Istanbul as well, Miami, and then getting to travel a bit to gallery spaces in New York and Saint-Paul-de-Vence as well. So just, that was one of the little perks. I mean, of course, you're working like crazy and you're on your feet for most of the day, but it's always amazing to be in a new territory, and it feels very dynamic and invigorating at the same time.
Oh, brilliant. Nadia, thank you so much for coming on the channel to talk to me.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure.
Should we go get some lunch?
Yes.
Yeah.